Happy Friday. Can't believe it's Friday. It's May 15th. Oh my gosh, 2 more weeks of school. Let's get the pledge and motto going so we can figure out who the 4th ticket winner is from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Salute and pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Today I'm not going to put the camera over there. I'm going to see if you know the pledge or the school motto. We are students at Peter J. Shields. We believe in kindness. We are responsible. We are persistent. We are respectful. We are bucket fillers. We drop acts of kindness into everything we do. We are Peter J. Shields. Anyway, hope you guys are doing well. Thanks for tuning in, and let's get started. Cannot believe I'm actually getting through a 3rd book with you guys. I'm glad I was prepared. A little over planning. That's what we teachers seem to do best anyway. All right, now, remember Charlie asked when we ended up, who got the 4th ticket? Now let me see, said Mr. Bucket, peering in the newspaper again. Ah, yes, here we are. The 4th golden ticket, he read, was found by a boy called Mike TV. Oh, another bad lot, I'll be bound, muttered Grandma Josephine. Don't interrupt, Grandma, said Mrs. Bucket. The TV household, said Mr. Bucket, was going on with reading. Was crammed like all the others with excited visitors when our reporter arrived, but young Mike TV, the lucky winner, seemed extremely annoyed by the whole thing. Can't you fools see I'm watching television, he said angrily. I wish you wouldn't interrupt. So remember, this is back in the day where TV was just getting started. No DVRs, no apps, no Netflix, none of that, okay? The 9-year-old boy was seated before an enormous television set with his eyes glued to the screen, and he was watching a film, one with a bunch of gangsters shooting up another bunch of gangsters with machine guns, and Mike TV himself had no less than 18 toy pistols of various sizes hanging from belts around his body, and now every now and again, he would leap up into the air and fire off half a dozen rounds from one or the other of these weapons. So there he is, sitting in front of his TV. Quiet, he shouted when someone tried to ask him a question. Didn't I tell you not to interrupt? This show's an absolute whiz-banger. It's terrific. I watch it every day. I watch all of them every day, even the crummy ones where there's like no shooting. I like the gangsters best. Of course, they're terrific, those gangsters, especially when they start pumping each other full of lead or flashing the old stilettos or giving each other a 1, 2, 3 with their knuckle dusters. Oh boy, what I wouldn't give to be doing that myself. That's the life. I tell you, it's terrific. That's quite enough, snapped Grandma Josephine. I can't bear to listen to it. Nor me, said Grandma Georgina. Do all children behave like this nowadays? Like these brats we've been hearing about? Of course not, said Mr. Bucket, smiling at the old lady in bed. Some do, of course. In fact, quite a lot of them do, but not all. And now, there's only 1 ticket left, said Grandpa George. Quite so, sniffed Grandma Georgina. And just as sure as I'll be having cabbage soup for supper tomorrow, that ticket will go to some nasty little beast who doesn't deserve it. Chapter 9, Grandpa Joe Takes a Gamble. The next day, when Charlie came home from school and went in to see his grandparents, he found out only Grandpa Joe was awake. The other 3 were all snoring loudly. Shh, whispered Grandpa Joe. He beckoned Charlie to come a little closer. Charlie tiptoed over and stood beside the bed. The old man gave Charlie a sly grin, and then he started rummaging under his pillow with one hand, and when the hand came out again, there was an ancient leather purse clutched in his fingers. Covered in his bedclothes, the old man opened the purse and tipped it upside down. Out fell a single silver 10-cent piece. Shh, it's my secret hoard, he whispered. The others don't know I've got it, and now you and I are going to have one more fling at finding that last ticket. How about it, eh? But you'll have to help me. Are you sure you want to spend your money on that, Grandpa? Charlie whispered. Of course I'm sure, sputtered the old man excitedly. Don't stand there arguing. I'm just as crazy as you to find that ticket. Here, take the money and run down to the street to the nearest store, excuse me, and buy the first Wonka candy bar you see and bring it straight back to me. We'll open it together. Charlie took the silver coin and slipped quickly out of the room, and in 5 minutes he was back. Have you got it? Whispered Grandpa Joe, his eyes all shining with excitement. Charlie nodded and held out the candy bar. Wonka's Nutty Crunch Surprise, it said on the wrapper. Good, the old man whispered, sitting on the bed and rubbing his hands. Now come over here and sit close to me. We'll open it together. Are you ready? Yes, Charlie said, I'm ready. All right, you tear off the first bit. No, Charlie said, you paid for it. You do it all. The old man's fingers were trembling most terribly, and they fumbled at the candy bar. We don't have a hope, really, he whispered, giggling a bit. You know we don't have a hope, don't you? Yes, Charlie said. I know that. They looked at each other and both started giggling nervously. Mind you, said Grandpa Joe, there's just a tiny chance that it might be the one. Don't you agree? Oh, yes, Charlie said, of course. Why don't you open it, Grandpa? All in good time, my boy, all in good time. Which end do you think ought to open first? The corner, the one furthest from you. Just tear it off a tiny bit, not quite enough for us to see anything. Like that? Said the old man. Yes, now a little bit more. Oh, you finish it, said Grandpa Joe. I'm too nervous. No, Grandpa, you must do it yourself. Well, very well then. There it goes. He tore off the wrapper. They both stared at what lay underneath. Just a bar of candy, nothing more. All at once, they both saw the funny side of the whole thing, and they began to burst into peals of laughter. What the heck's going on? Said Grandma Josephine, waking up suddenly. Oh, nothing, said Grandpa Joe. You won't go back to sleep. Chapter 10, the family begins to starve. During the next 2 weeks, the weather turned very cold. First came the snow. It became very suddenly one morning, just as Charlie Bucket was getting dressed for school. Standing by the window, he saw huge flakes drifting slowly out of an icy sky that was the color of steel. By evening, it lay 4 feet deep around the tiny house, and Mr. Bucket had to dig a path to the front door, from the front door to the road. After the snow, there came a freezing gale that blew for days and days without stopping, and oh, how bitter cold it was. Everything that Charlie touched seemed to be made of ice, and each time he stepped outside the door, the wind was like a knife on his cheek. Inside the house, little jets of freezing air came rushing through the sides of the windows and under the doors, and there was no place to escape. The 4 old ones lay silently huddled in the bed, trying to keep the cold out of their bones. The excitement over the golden tickets had long since been forgotten. Nobody in the family gave a thought to anything now except 2 vital problems of trying to keep warm and trying to get enough to eat. There's something about very cold weather that gives you an enormous appetite. Most of us find ourselves beginning to crave rich, steamy stews and hot apple pies and all kinds of delicious, warming dishes because we are all a great deal luckier than we realize. We usually get what we want, or near enough. But Charlie Bucket never got what he wanted because the family couldn't afford it. And as the cold weather went on and on, he became ravenously and desperately hungry. Both bars of candy, the birthday one and the one Grandpa Joe had bought, had long since been nibbled away. And all he got now were those thin, cabbagey meals 3 times a day. Then all at once, the meals became thinner. The reason for this was that the toothpaste factory, the place where Mr. Bucket worked, suddenly went bust and had to close down. Quickly, Mr. Bucket tried to get another job, but with no luck, and in the end, the only way in which he managed to earn a few pennies was by shoveling snow in the streets. But it wasn't enough to buy even a quarter of the food that 7 people need. The situation became desperate. Breakfast was a single slice of bread for each person, and lunch was maybe half a boiled potato. Slowly but surely, everybody in the house began to starve, and every day, little Charlie Bucket, trudging through the snow on his way to school, would have to pass Mr. Willy Wonka's giant chocolate factory, and every day he came near to it, he would lift his small pointed nose high in the air and sniff the wonderful sweet smell of melting chocolate. Sometimes he would stand motionless outside the gates for several minutes on end, taking deep swallowing breaths as though he were trying to eat the smell itself. Oh, that child, Grandpa Joe said, poking his head up from under the blanket on one icy morning. That child has got to have more food. It doesn't matter about us. We're too old to bother with. But a growing boy, he can't go on like this. He's beginning to look like a skeleton. What can one do, murmured Grandma Josephine miserably. He refuses to take any of ours. I hear his mother tried to slip her own piece of bread onto his plate at breakfast this morning, and he wouldn't touch it. He made her take it back. He is a fine little fellow, said Grandpa George. He deserves better than this. The cruel weather went on, and every day Charlie Bucket grew thinner and thinner, and his face became frighteningly white and pinched. The skin was drawn so tightly over his cheeks that you could see the shapes of his bones underneath. It seemed doubtful whether he could go on much longer like this without becoming dangerously ill. And now, very calmly, with that curious wisdom that seems to come so often to small children in times of hardship, he began to make little changes here and there in some of the things that he did, so as to save his strength. In the mornings, he left the house 10 minutes earlier so that he could walk slower to school without having to run. He sat quietly in the classroom during recess, resting himself while the others rushed outdoors and threw snowballs and wrestled in the snow. Everything he did now, he did slowly and carefully to prevent exhaustion. Then one afternoon, walking back through the icy wind in his face, and incidentally feeling hungrier than he'd ever felt before, his eye caught suddenly by a piece of paper that was lying in the gutter in the snow. The paper was of greenish color, and there was something vaguely familiar about it. Charlie stepped off the curb and bent down to examine it. Part of it was buried under the snow, but he saw it at once. It was a $1 bill. Quickly, he looked around. Had somebody dropped it? No, that was impossible because part of it was buried. Several people went hurrying past him on the sidewalk, their chins sunk deep in their collars of their coats, their feet crunching in the snow. None of them was searching for any money at all. None of them was taking the slightest notice of the small boy crouched in the gutter. Then it was his, this $1. Could he have it? Carefully, Charlie pulled it up from under the snow, and it was damp and dirty, but otherwise perfect. A whole $1. He held it tightly between his shivering fingers, gazing down at it. It meant one thing to him at the moment, only one thing. It meant food. Remember, this was written a long time ago, so it might be like $20 or $30 now. Automatically, Charlie turned and began moving toward the nearest shop. It was only 10 paces away. It was a newspaper and stationery store, the kind that sells almost everything, including candy. And what would he do? He whispered quickly to himself. He would buy one luscious bar of candy and eat it all up, every bit of it, right then and there. And the rest of the money he would take straight back home and give to his mother. Chapter 11, The Miracle. Charlie entered the store and laid the damp $1 bill on the counter. One Wonka's Scrumptious Fudge Mellow Delight, he said, remembering how much he had loved that one on his birthday. The man behind the counter looked fat and well-fed. He had big lips and fat cheeks and a very fat neck. The fat around his neck bulged around the top of the collar like the rubber ring. He turned and reached behind him for the candy bar. Then he turned back again and handed it to Charlie. Charlie grabbed it quickly and tore off the wrapper and took an enormous bite. Then he took another. Oh, the joy of being able to cram large pieces of something sweet and solid into one's mouth. The sheer blissful joy of being able to fill one's mouth with rich, solid food. You look like you wanted that one, Sonny, the shopkeeper said pleasantly. Charlie nodded, his mouth bulging with chocolate. The shopkeeper put Charlie's change on the counter. Take it easy, he said. It'll give you a gut ache if you swallow it without chewing. Charlie went on wolfing the candy. He couldn't stop. And in less than a minute, the whole thing had disappeared down his throat. He was quite out of breath, but he felt marvelously and extraordinarily happy. He reached out his hand to take the change, then he paused, his eyes just above the level of the counter, staring at the silver coins lying there. The coins were all dimes. There were 9 of them altogether. Surely it wouldn't matter if he spent just one more. I think, he said quietly, I think I'll have just one more of those candy bars. The same as before, please. Well, why not? The shopkeeper said, reaching behind him and taking another Wimple Scrumptious Fudge Mellow Delight from the shelf. He laid it on the counter. Charlie picked it up and tore off the wrapper. And suddenly, underneath the wrapper, there came a brilliant flash of gold. Charlie's heart stood still. It's a golden ticket, screamed the shopkeeper, leaping about a foot in the air. You've got a golden ticket. You found the last golden ticket. Hey, what do you know? Come take a look at this, everybody. The kids found Wonka's last golden ticket. There it is, right here in his hands. It seemed as though the shopkeeper might be going to have a fit. And in my shop, too. He found it right here in my own little shop. Somebody call the newspapers quick and let them know. Watch out now, Sonny. Don't tear it as you unwrap it. That thing's precious. And in a few seconds, there were crowds of about 20 people clustering around Charlie, and more were pushing their way from the street. Everybody wanted to get a look at the golden ticket and the lucky finder. Where is it? Somebody shouted. Hold it up so we can all see it. There it is, somebody shouted. He's holding it in his hands. See the gold shining? How did he manage to find it, I'd like to know, a large boy shouted angrily. 20 bars a day I've been buying for weeks and weeks. Think of all the free stuff he'll be getting, too, another boy said enviously. A lifetime supply. He'll need it, that skinny little shrimp, said a girl, laughing. Charlie hadn't moved. He hadn't even unwrapped the golden ticket from around the candy bar. He was standing very still, holding it tightly with both hands while the crowd pushed and shouted all around him. He felt quite dizzy. There was a peculiar floating sensation coming from all over him, as though he were floating up in the air like a balloon. His feet didn't seem to be touching the ground at all. He could hear his heart thumping away loudly, something were in his throat. At that point, he became aware of a hand resting slightly on his shoulder, and when he looked up, he saw a tall man standing over him. Listen, said the man. I'll buy it from you. I'll give you $50. How about it, huh? I'll give you a new bicycle, too, okay? Are you crazy? Shouted a woman who was standing closely. Why'd you give him $500 for that ticket? You want to sell that ticket? Give $500 to the young man. Oh, that's quite enough of that, the shopkeeper shouted and pushed his way through the crowd, taking Charlie firmly by the arm. Leave the kid alone, will you? Make a way there. Let him out. And he led Charlie to the door, and he whispered, don't let anybody have it. Take it straight home quickly before you lose it. Run all the way home and don't stop till you get there. Charlie nodded. You know something, the fat shopkeeper said? I have a feeling you needed a break like this, and I'm awfully glad you got it. Good for you, Sonny. Thank you, said Charlie, and off he went running through the snow. As fast as his legs would go, past the factory, and he turned and waved, I'll be seeing you soon, I'll be seeing you soon. And 5 minutes later, he arrived at home. I gotta go. Bye. Happy Friday. Be good.